I'll say this. April in the D is in full effect. Tigers are in first place. The Detroit Pistons are going to the postseason. We are going to talk about that, do a little preview of their series against the New York Knicks. Thank you for tuning into the show today. I am Chris Castellani. Like I said on Chris and Company last week, I want to come into these shows a little bit quicker. So CastellaniContent.com, you can find everything that we post. Archived are all of our post-game videos as well. If you like this podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. And if you want to watch us and see this beautiful face in video form, you can find us on YouTube. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. All right. As I've talked about in the past, we are entering a point in the season. Red Wings done. Football done. College basketball done. Where there's only going to be, once the Pistons are out, assuming, they don't go on some deep run, which I don't think they will, that baseball is going to kind of be the only game in town. And as much as I love baseball and could talk about it all the time, this show is meant to be a little bit more broad. Now, we're going to talk plenty of Tigers. Don't worry. We're going to lead off with Tigers here. But I want to kind of have a few different segments where I talk about some different things that might not necessarily be related to Detroit sports. But in the summer, I feel like that's an opportunity. I've talked about this with Austin to really get more creative, not just with what we do on I'll Say This, but I think also with the guests that we do, or that we do, Freudian slip, that we have on Chris and Company, because, you're not really abiding by the week-to-week schedule of college football, or, you get my point. Yeah, I think people get my point. I can explain it. All right, let's jump right into it. Detroit Tigers had a very good week. Another very good week. They play 2 series. They win 2 series. They go 4-2, winning a home series against the New York Yankees, and then they win 2 out of 3 in a road series at Target Field against the Minnesota Twins. Like, I know the Tigers lost that last game, and I think the Twins are 5-11 now. There's a lot to be concerned about with that club. They just don't look right. They look like the team that we saw in September a year ago. Now, look, I don't care. I want to win games. I'm not putting an asterisk by it just because, I don't know, this team's completely fractured. But, yeah, you can tell that's not the best clubhouse to be in right now. And look, maybe they find it, maybe they don't. But all in all, look, Detroit's identity is shown through over these last several series, and really the first 15 games of the year. This team pitches extremely well. Jackson Jobe got his first major league win the other night. I guess the big stories to kind of talk about, because we knew the pitching would be good, is one, they continue to be the gritty Tigers, the comeback team. It is a fun team to watch and has been over the last few years now, because you never feel like they are out of a game. And I know it sounds strange to almost praise a team like that, because you would think to yourself, yeah, you shouldn't be out of a game. These guys are professionals. They're getting paid. But I think where this starts and how this starts is with the pitching, and especially what they get out of the bullpen. And I brought it up last week in one of my post-game videos, but I'll bring it up again, where when you look back at some of those Tigers rosters in the 2010s, right, that had Andy Dirks as a player, right, where you had, just going through the lineup here, Austin Jackson, Torrey Hunter, Miggy, Prince, Victor, Delman Young, Dirks, Alex Avila, take your pick, right? Just an incredible lineup, and that great starting pitching. And they would win a ton of games, right? They'd win 90 games a year off the backs of great starting pitching in that powerful lineup. But on a day in which their starting pitcher maybe didn't have it, it was going to be a loss. And the reason for it is that whoever they went to out of the bullpen in those situations was usually a dud. A lot of people have this mindset of, the Tigers closers were terrible during that time. Okay, Nathan was terrible. And Jose Valverde in the playoffs was terrible. But when you look at that run, whether it was Todd Jones in 06 or Valverde in 11 or Benoit in 13, they actually had pretty good seasons. The problem was a lot of games that were 3-1 games that you felt like they could have come back and won ended up being 6-1 because whatever, nothing they brought out of the bullpen would get rocked, and ultimately the game was kind of put on ice. Where this kind of identity starts with the gritty Tigers, obviously, is with the pitching in general. I mean, when you have so many different guys who are capable of shutting down lineups, it's key. But you let a team hang around long enough and you give them enough opportunities, especially a good team, that's what the Tigers are able to take advantage of. And, I think Friday night was a prime example of that, where you had a game where Reese was, one, getting squeezed by the umpire quite a bit, and two, just didn't really have it. You turn it over to the pen. The pen's not giving up runs. Brisky gave up one, and I think, Canely gave up a seeing eye single RBI there, but you get my point. It was 4-1, and they scored 4, I believe, in the 6th inning to go ahead 5-4. You know, there's other iterations of the Detroit Tigers that wouldn't have allowed that to happen because the bullpen simply wouldn't have been deep enough. The fact that you can get like garbage time innings from guys like Herter, who I think are pretty good, it's important. I mean, you had a game last week against the Yankees where Scuba went 6 scoreless, and you only used 2 pitchers because Herter was able to come out of the pen and pitch 3 scoreless. A lot of depth in the pen. Not saying everyone is necessarily going right at the same time, but there's a lot to like there in regards to the pitching staff. The other big story now, and it's one I'm happy to talk about, is the ascension of Spencer Torkelson. And I don't know how much longer it's going to take before I am officially like, okay, this is 100% real. Okay. Now, he is obviously a significantly improved player, right? But there's a big difference between having several really good weeks or even a really good month and being a guy who could be an 850 plus OPS guy for you over an entire season, or in the case of Torkelson, hopefully multiple seasons. So I don't know if I'm quite there yet of being like, he's arrived, the player that we thought he was going to be out of Arizona State. He is. I don't know if I'm at that point yet. I'm still a little bit scarred, right? At the same time, to not be overwhelmingly impressed by the player that we're watching right now, which is a player whose approach and process is completely different. The change stance has done wonders for him. And, you know, let's run with the idea that this is legitimate, that the future all-star that the Tigers believed they were getting when they drafted him during the COVID year in 2020 is finally here. You know, you give Torkelson a lot of credit, but I really think this is one of the biggest differences between the player development in this regime versus player development in the past, where I'm always under the belief, and look, I wasn't in the front office. I wasn't chatting with Al Avila. I would have liked to. I would have had a lot of questions. But the fact is, I was always under the impression that the Tigers' player development in the past was more about the player figuring it out on their own. And if there was an instance in which you had a very talented player who was able to make adjustments and fix things, it was fine. But those farm systems were never particularly deep because I just don't feel like the focus on development was as critical as it is in this current regime. Like in the case of Torkelson, I can guarantee you there are people in that front office who have had long nights looking at his swing, assessing every single at-bat, looking at the swing path, looking at launch angle. What can we do to improve this player? Because there are those instances. No matter how talented of a player you are, and you don't go 1-1 on accident, no matter how talented of a player you are, there are going to be those instances in which you hit a wall. And you can't always make those adjustments on your own, right? I'll use Justin Verlander as the prime example, right? Justin Verlander, in terms of stuff, like one of the greatest pitchers, just one of the greatest pitchers ever, period, right? But he was open about the fact that as good as he was, you know, he got off to kind of a so-so start in the 2017 season, got traded to Houston, and then immediately became as good as he'd ever been, and mentioned the fact that he went into that video room and immediately, you know, fixed his slider. Those were the kind of resources that a team like Houston had then that the Tigers didn't. And now, thankfully, they've pushed things into the 21st century. And I know that there was talk in the offseason with Torkelson about how he was simplifying things. And he even got, you know, kind of criticized for having that quote where he's like, you know, I'm going to try not to watch as much film. And I understood the criticism of that, but I think a lot of that was taken out of context. And we brought it up when I talked to AJ as well, where he's like, look, there is a point where you got to find that balance between the data that's given to you and not overthinking things. And I think that when you are a player like Torkelson, who has dominated every level of baseball that he'd played at, who expected probably, you know, to be able to make a quicker adjustments at the big league level, you get to a point where you probably start pressing. I mean, how many at-bats last season did he start down 0-2, where he would get a pitch that was hittable, take it for strike one, and then get something that was not hittable and follow it away, and all of a sudden it's 0-2. It's just, you see a much more confident player. I mean, he's been so good that I've had to ask myself, like, am I too critical? Or have I been too critical? Because I'm wrong all the time, and I'm willing to accept that I'm wrong. And there have been instances in the past with Tiger players, with Michigan players, any athlete, in which I maybe not buried them, but became incredibly skeptical of what they could be well before they ever popped off, you know, and I look back on it and say, you kind of overreacted. With Torque, I'm looking at it, and there will be this collection of people, if Torkelson keeps this up, which I hope he does, there will be this collection of people that are going to say, see, I told you we had nothing to worry about. I'm sorry, everyone gets a mulligan on this one. Guys, the numbers for a number 1 overall pick were shockingly awful for a guy 3 years into his career. And you could say, hey, you know, 2023, he had a good second half, started raking, like, it's clearly in there. We know it's in there. He went 1-1. Of course it's in there. But for him to be able to find it this consistently. Now, do I think Torque has a, whatever it is, 1,100 OPS the rest of the season? No. But this is very important. I was talking to somebody about this over the weekend, because let's say the other shoe drops at some point, not where he really starts struggling, but where he just falls off a little bit. This is a huge stretch because he is doing this with this team down 3 pretty significant key pieces of their lineup. You know, without Vierling and without Meadows and without Wenzel Perez, that's huge. Like, he's carried them at a time in which the offense has not been at full force, and Torque deserves a lot of credit for that. But you also got to credit guys like Dylan Dingler, who have gotten off to a great start. Zach McKinstry, who's gotten off to a fantastic start as well. I mean, these are key contributors, and I think there was a time back in the day when if the Tigers got injured, it was just like they were going to call up a guy who was. I mean, we used to employ a lot of Ryan Kreidlers. Ryan Kreidler catching strays, but come on, you know, you get my point. Where I think that in the current culture that they have here, you know, they try not to overthink things and overdo it, in the sense where if you look at it from the standpoint of, hey, we need you to be a really effective player for 2 months while Parker rehabs or while Vierling rehabs, it can get overwhelming. It's that simple approach of just try to be good today and help us today. And they've gotten that obviously out of Torkelson, and they've gotten that obviously out of McKinstry and Dingler. You know, tough to see them drop that game against Minnesota, because it really felt like they had an opportunity to go for the sweep there and should have, really. I mean, it felt like the pitching matchup favored them. One more thing I want to just talk about, because he is now the new Tigers Twitter punching bag, and that's Colt Keith. Maybe this is me softening, and I don't know. Maybe. And I know he went 0 for 4 on Sunday. Colt's going to be fine, okay? I understand optically it's bad. The guy's made some very serious mistakes at second. He's cost him 2 games with the errors. But, I mean, I remember on opening day, I had people asking me if Colt was going to be, like, sent down to Toledo. No. Colt Keith is going to be fine. I think, to a certain extent, and we talked about it with Scott Bentley in the offseason on Chris and Company, I think that his brain is a little bit scrambled from all the switching, where you're kind of promised, hey, you're our first baseman, and then immediately, I mean, the whole Colt Keith is our first baseman thing lasted about 5 seconds, because Torque raked in spring and he's raking right now. So you move him to second. Look, it doesn't excuse the mistakes, but I think that this is an issue that a lot of people run into, and it probably seems like I'm talking down to people, and I don't know, shit, maybe I am, but it's one of those instances where we can't assess a player's effectiveness based on 1 or 2 games in baseball the way that we do in football, right? I mean, the Tigers have played 15 games. That means they are essentially the equivalent of having played 1 NFL game, or, you know, probably around 1 NFL game up to this point, because you got the 17-game schedule now, right? You wouldn't give up on a Lions player because he had a bad third quarter in game 1. I don't know. Shit. Again, maybe some people would, but people who use logic and rational thought wouldn't do that, right? It's got to be the same thing with Keith. And it's difficult where you have that microscope and it's every day and you want to see a win instead of a loss. I understand all that. I in some ways, you know, sympathize with all of that. But, you know, this is a player in the second year of his career and he's still figuring it out. I think that Colt Keith is going to be a very consistent player here for a long time. While I understand the frustrations and, you know, he's beating himself up about it. Maybe that's the thing. And maybe that's where I have softened is like, what good is telling someone they're a big, dumb asshole going to do? He knows. You saw him in the clubhouse, in the dugout. He's just devastated. So Colt's going to be all right. I want to talk a little bit of basketball. Basketball. Give me the ball because I'm gonna dunk it. Whoa, basketball. Detroit Pistons are in the playoffs. They will match up against the New York Knicks. Look, this is a unique situation, and the Pistons, I think, are in many ways in as good a place as a team can possibly be entering the postseason, because this is what I call a house money campaign. I think Michigan basketball had a similar thing this year where when you come off of a stretch of being historically awful, right? Anything the Pistons do in the playoffs, you still look at it and say, wow, this is a successful season and things are trending in the right direction, right? And that is all true. At the same time, I came on here last week and said, you got to put an end to that ridiculous playoff losses streak. You haven't won a playoff game since 2008, and you've been there a few times. Can't get swept. And they will not get swept. I think that this is an instance where there is significantly more pressure on the New York Knicks. Obviously, they had the big trade in the offseason acquiring Karl Anthony Towns. They kind of, which was surprising, but they kind of pushed their chips to the center of the table. Jalen Brunson has obviously become the franchise player for them, though he's had some injury issues this year. Him going up against Cade Cunningham should be, really, that's kind of the matchup of the entire series. I'm not going to come on here and make a prediction necessarily, other than I'm very confident the Pistons win at least a game and could even push this thing to 6 or 7. Gun to my head, I think I go with the more experienced group, but just kind of looking at the numbers that I was looking at, it's a relatively favorable matchup for Detroit, because Detroit, to their credit, has done a marvelous job this year of revamping that roster and actually getting some shooters. And the Knicks defense is so. It's not awful by any means. It's kind of bizarre because I know Tom Thibodeau has always been a coach that's really preached, he was coaching Chicago for a long time when they had Noah and those guys. They were, good defensive teams. They're not a team that forces a ton of turnovers. And ideally, if you can get Cade in a situation where he's spacing the floor and kind of kicks it out to Hardaway or kicks it out to Beasley and these guys start knocking down shots, if you steal a game in Madison Square Garden, you could come back home. The atmosphere should be pretty electric. So look, they've had a marvelous season, and it's been an incredible turnaround. They had a game against the Knicks that felt like a playoff game last week where Cade just went nuts. It's a really exciting thing. I'm happy for the Pistons. I'm happy for their fans, and I'm just upset at myself that I can't get more into it. And I don't know, that's me trying to do the best I can to preview this series. I'll never claim to be an expert on the NBA, but I'm really frustrated because in general, I don't get pissed off at bandwagon fans. Okay. That's how 95% of the world works. All right. Most people weren't watching the Tigers when Kristen Stewart was batting cleanup, and a lot of people are watching them now. Okay. That's the way the world works. There's too much time in your hands. Life is too short. Okay. So when the Pistons were terrible, I couldn't get mad at myself for not feeling anything. Right. But the Knicks game last week is a prime example where I'm watching things and seeing things that are aesthetically very pleasing. I've talked about it. They've added depth on this team. They've gotten actual shooters. Cade's been a superstar. Seems like the culture's good. Bickerstaff has done a remarkable job. And yet I feel absolutely nothing. I'm not rooting against them. In fact, I'm rooting for them. But it's one of those woohoo, kind of go I think one of the things that is appealing to the people that like my content is that it's authentic. And when I react to good things, I react authentically. When I react to negative things, I react authentically. And I'll react authentically to the Pistons. I just think people will find it boring. I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe it will be nothing. And this is something that I've talked about many times on this show, but look, there was definitely a period of time where I felt a certain level of anger at the Pistons, but to me, that resets when you have a new regime, and they've done everything right in the last calendar year to fix this thing. They are the first franchise in the history of the NBA, I believe, to triple their win total from a season ago. It's been really incredible. So I want good things to happen to them, and maybe at some point that switch flips. But right now, I will watch and hope the best for them. But I would be lying to you if I told you that it was going to have an impact on my day the way that a Tigers game or a Lions game or a Michigan game does. But still, this has been a long time coming. I know they've made the playoffs a few times before, but this is easily the most fun Pistons campaign since 2008 because it's been a genuine surprise. I know they made the playoffs with Blake Griffin in 19, but even that team, they thought they were going to do so much more, and they snuck in as an 8 seed and got boat raced. This is the first time in forever where you feel like they have a legitimate chance to not just win a playoff game, but win a playoff series. So it's exciting to see. All right, last segment here. This might end up being a shorter show. I don't know. It depends on how long I talk here, but This really has not much to do with Detroit or Michigan sports necessarily. In fact, it doesn't really at all. There's not much else to talk about. A few more guys enter the portal. Trey Holloman committed to NC State. We're way too early to be talking about football stuff at this point, but I want to, and this may be the only time in which I ever use this statement on this show. I want to talk about golf. Okay. And this is where, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've softened a little bit, because there would have been a time, probably pre-COVID, in which this would have been a 10-minute long segment of me screaming about how dumb golf is and about how every person who likes golf is stupid. Hey, I'm not that guy anymore. Grown up, I've literally sobered up, and I think that I take things in a little bit easier at this point, right? So I'm more baffled than I am angry, because golf is a very legitimate sport. I have tremendous respect for people that play golf. It is, physically, I don't know how taxing it is. Fucking John Daly played golf, but mentally, it's an extremely draining game. I was a tennis player in high school. That's mentally a very tough game as well. Golf is the same way. So I have great respect for people that play golf. They're legitimate athletes, legitimate sport, legitimate accomplishments. All of that is true. I'm not looking at golf with the kind of ire that people look at poker and say, how legitimate is this as a sport? I'm not going there. So nothing but respect for the golfers. And if you love golf, if you love following the majors, man, great. Okay. There is not, I more than anybody in the world have absolutely no place to criticize anybody about the things that they love, follow, and are obsessed with. Okay. You guys have seen me rant about the silliest shit on here. So this isn't me pointing fingers and saying you're dumb for enjoying something. This is me coming on here and saying, I don't get it. As of the time of this recording, the Masters is still going on. My opinion doesn't change regardless of who wins the Masters. I don't really care. But I find golf so unbelievably boring. And I understand that there's a lot of people out there that do. But there is a worship for the sports that diehard golf people have that, hey, look, you're welcome to have your opinion. I'm not mad at you. But I just don't really understand. I think to a certain extent, and you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments today, but I think golf is like wrestling now, where people kind of get attached to the storylines and the rivalries. And I'm not saying it's phony necessarily, but I don't know. I feel when I see two basketball players that don't like each other, matching up, mid-court and going one-on-one against each other, it hits a little bit differently than two guys who are wearing, white pants and a polo shirt. I just, okay, you can maybe they'll get into a slap and tickle fight, and then I'll tell they really hate each other. So maybe it's the storylines as part of it, right? I guess. But to me, golf is what baseball would be if the pitch clock was 5 minutes long. You'll see action in between long periods of really nothing. And again, if you like it, fine. But I've had people, Mike Valenti, who, regardless of how you feel about him, incredibly successful broadcaster, very smart guy, called the Masters one of the best weekends of sports every year. That essentially means that you are comparing, because what are the other great weekends in sports? The first weekend of the NCAA tournament. That's basically you saying that this is on par, maybe slightly below the excitement that is the first weekend of the tournament, right? Or opening day, and people have their interests. It is, I just don't get it. This is me coming on here and saying, I just don't get it. I watch it. And first of all, I just kind of chuckle. Everyone's taking themselves so seriously. They're literally buttoned up. I don't know. There's something kind of amusing about it. Everyone just has a stick up their ass. I find the whole thing so tedious. And similar to what I brought up with the Pistons a minute ago, I have so many adult friends now because I'm not 16 anymore, thank God. I have so many adult friends who golf and who talk about golf. And I try to be, in some sense, relatively cultured, right? I don't know nuclear physics, but I can maintain a conversation about, I don't know, take your pick, the environment or politics. I don't know why somebody would want to have a political conversation with me, but that's beside the point. But I hear these people talk about golf and they get excited about it the same way that I get excited about baseball. And most of the time that would be endearing. You find a guy on YouTube who's collecting stamps and you're like, wow, this guy's so passionate about it. I'm kind of intrigued, but like I'm listening to it and it's like they're speaking like they've been watching something on another planet. And it doesn't vibe with me. You're obviously welcome on my page and to follow my content, but I would say that it's just me being a part of this short attention span TikTok culture that I'm in. But again, people my age and even younger are like golf obsessives, or have the people. I saw more tweets about the Masters app, the iPhone app this week than I've seen about any app that's ever existed. Like, it's fucking dumb golf. People have told me to play it forever. I'm not gonna. People have told me to watch it forever. I've tried. Now, I obviously understand if you are into golf, the Masters is your Super Bowl. Like, duh. I know the importance of it. Legacies are made, all that stuff. It's the one major sporting event or the one major sport where I look at it and I'm just baffled by the popularity. Like, I grew up in Michigan. There's not, I guess, I don't know that we have the motor speedway here, but in general, I didn't grow up around a lot of NASCAR fans. I understand the appeal of NASCAR because I understand the appeal of cars and things moving fast and, rooting for your favorite driver and kind of following along with, there is a certain level of intrigue. Like, I'm not going to watch it, but there's a certain element of it that I get. I don't like UFC. Okay. To me, like, I just, maybe I'm a pacifist, watching people bleed from the head and break their fucking legs and, choke people. That's just not my thing, really. I have respect for what they do. Obviously, they're incredible athletes. It's not my vibe, but I get it. I don't get it with golf. Best sports weekend of the year? Okay. All right. I feel like I'm missing a segment today, but that's really all I have to say. I hopefully I'll get some interesting comments today because I do want to try to understand it. I don't want to be, Mr. Stick in the Mud, but maybe that's who I am. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for watching and paying attention to today's episode. That sounded weird. Castellani 2014 on Twitter, CastellaniContent.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We will be back with a Chris and Company this week. Jim Costa of 97.1 will be joining the show this week. And then Austin and I have been working on getting some guests to kind of roll out over the next several weeks here to film a few shows. It's obviously, and I'm very appreciative of this, much easier to get local guests just because I know who they are, and in many instances, they know who I am. But we're trying to, broaden our horizons in the summer a little bit to keep you guys entertained and kind of expand that show. I think we do great stuff with the Detroit market, and we're never going to leave that. But, we do two shows for a reason. And one is to make sure that we're covering as much Detroit stuff as possible. That's what I'll say this. And then with Chris and Company, it's whoever I find interesting. And hopefully you guys continue to follow along. So appreciate all of you. Hope you enjoyed the Masters. I will talk to you guys here in just a few days for Chris and Company. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.